Hello, good morning. Yes, so we are back. Yesterday we went completely off-road, started talking about styling. I was ranting about basically how CSS and JS libraries work and how we jumped into this world of complete dynamic behavior by being able to look at the props. And how that affects the performance and the complexity of the API, and maybe it's not necessary to have it. And then we talked about how we could change the styled API of stitches. I got a comment on like why CSS and JS at all, and it's a really good question because we have these two camps now where some people just use plain CSS or some like less or Sass, and then you have the CSS and JS people. And in my experience, like I started out way back when there was no like CSS is incredibly low level. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff. Everything's global, and that was a big problem on the projects I worked on initially, because I always worked on pretty big projects with several team members, and doing plain CSS was just horrible because we were putting everything in the global space and just figuring out how to do things, agree on how to do things, like naming things, structure things. One thing is inside a CSS file, but then you have multiple CSS files. How do we get them into the code and all of that stuff? Super hard to do. But then things started popping up. For example, CSS modules. That was a big turnaround for me. I thought that made a ton of sense because you were able to define your CSS in the context of something you wanted to implement, which was typically a component. And yeah, that certainly helped a lot. But what really helped with CSS in JS is the perspective. Like you can talk about performance and doing critical, what's it called? When you do server-side rendering, CSS in JS automatically extracts the CSS that is needed. You can use the same API for your web application and your native application, for example, stuff like that, if you need it. But what changes it for me is that you can say that I want this element, and this is how the element is going to look like. Instead of creating some arbitrary class, which can be used with any element, if that makes sense. Like it might not seem like that much of a difference, but in my experience working with a team and the team defining elements and how those elements should look and behave in terms of CSS is a much more predictable collaborative way of and keeping consistency than having like a separate separate part where you define like CSS classes and you have to agree on the conventions and how to structure it and everything. Doing that, and if you also do less than CSS, less or Sass, the team also has to understand how to use less than Sass, which is a high ask for a team. Like if you're 5 people and everyone has to know less or Sass, it's like it takes time to learn that. It's different syntax. There's lots of amazing powerful stuff you can do there, but you have to learn it. But if you use a CSS and JS library, it's just JavaScript, and the API is typed and all that. So it's just way more familiar for someone who doesn't know less or Sass. And then you have like the argument of you can just install the CSS and JS library and get going. You don't have to think about setting up the environment for that, typically. But again, like CSS modules is part of, for example, if you use Webpack, Parcel. Parcel even has Less than Sass built in. So that's not too much of an argument. And I'm not saying that CSS in JS is better than not doing it. I'm just saying what I have experienced is difficult with using plain CSS or Less or Sass. Yeah. And then you have things like libraries where you kind of don't want to, you're only using part of the library. So you have to use tools to, for example, with Tailwind, you have to use tools to ensure that you're not extracting or inserting CSS in your app that's not being used. And that's like hell to work with. While in CSS in JS, that it automatically understands it. Stuff like that. But again, of course it's an API to learn, and it's just experience. That's the bottom line for me. It's about experience. Do you have a team that is experienced with CSS modules or like Less than Sass? Like, go for it. It's way more like straightforward. You just import, you just use a class name, you understand exactly what's happening. There's not much fluff in between where you use the class name and where you define it. But if you have a team which are mainly JavaScript developers who doesn't know that much about CSS or especially Less or Sass, I would like use a CSS and JS library because it's just it's way easier to get going with it and keep consistency, because consistency is the most important thing. Anyways, that's my just want to share that experience, or yeah, my experiences. Anyways, we have this yeah, I tweeted yesterday the stream, and I got some interesting feedback, especially related to these variants we were talking about. Maybe I can summarize it quickly, because we were talking about having doing this something equals styled, and then we were talking about the object syntax, but we're not going to do the object syntax first, because if we first move to object syntax in Stitches, it's going to be possible to do it with the core package as well. So it's not needed right now to do the changes we want to try out. So you should be able to define some styling as normal, color red. And the reason you do it like this and not like this is because when you use React, so let's take it the other way. So if you use a core package of Stitches, you just have this CSS variable that you use everywhere. But React has this concept of providing something. And in this case, what we're providing is the CSS instance with its configuration and everything. And the benefit of doing that is that if you were to use like a library based on Stitches, that library would be able to, because you provide your CSS instance at the top of the app, and then any component can pick up that CSS instance and use it. So again, if you use a library based on Stitches, that library will be able to pick up your CSS instance, your configured instance, and apply it to all the preset components, which is a super powerful thing. Anyways, so the API needs to be able to do this. It needs to be able to, let's see. So for example, header style.h1 CSS compose, again, color red. And then we talked about removing props. So we're not going to deal with props at all, but we are going to deal with variants as the replacement for props. And what it allows us to do is to have all our styling is completely static, so we don't have to reevaluate it. like Stitches is insanely fast in terms of reevaluation, because it does a lot of really smart caching. And also it doesn't have the object syntax and stuff, so it also reduces the like it gains some performance there. But still, like I have this like really strong intuition that handling props is not the right thing to do. The dynamic behavior of your elements in terms of styling should happen when you use the element, not from within. So let's see. Yes, so the way this would be was like a button, and then again you could have like some base styling, and then the second argument would be the variant. Now I talked to him a couple of times before, a guy named Pedro, who works at if you heard about Modules with a Z. They're a startup where you can like build components and deploy them to production and everything through their tool. It's really awesome. You should check it out. Anyways, I talked to him about how they are like they're choosing what should kind of drive their CSS, and it's a difficult choice to make. And they really want all the flexibility, of course. They want the ability to do server-side rendering, automatically extract the critical CSS, and all this stuff. But still, they want to play nicely with other libraries and other CSS and JS solutions. And if you don't want to use CSS and JS, you should be able to like add normal class names and stuff like that. So it's a difficult thing to figure out. And then they want like an API that makes it easier for people to create compositions of different styling, which is also like super difficult to figure out. But a concept he talked about, because my suggestion was to do like, okay, we want a secondary variant here. So the way this would look with doing this would be like blue, like this. And then when you consume the button, it would look like this, and you could say secondary. But he mentions the need for, like if you only have one variant, it's kind of difficult because variants can also have their own variants. And this might sound like a rabbit hole, like, but why can't variants of variants also have variants? But his example made a ton of sense. So for example, if you have a button, and they call it secondary, and that would be maybe be what we call a variant. So it's a secondary variant, but then it might have a size. So you have small, font color, font size, and then we use some tokens here, like 2 for example. And then you have like big. So the way this would work is that what our API would do then is to expose these keys as props. So you would have variant, and then the keys of variant here, like secondary, would be a valid input for this one. And then you have size, could be big, for example. And I think that for me that makes a ton of sense. And again, like what we're doing here, we could express all of this in less or Sass for sure. Like you would have variables as tokens. You would I don't know the name of the composition tools there, but you have composition tools to like create variants and stuff like that. But my point is that this is just JavaScript. So you don't have to learn a new language. Basically, you just use JavaScript. Anyways, but you get all this composition complexity in the API itself. Anyways, personally, I haven't like worked. I don't do I don't do styling. Like I've never been to like a workshop where you talk about variants and how to keep constraints in your design and all this stuff. But I do like through my career, I worked a lot with designers, and there is a big struggle there to move a design into code and make it consistent and good. So it's finding these concepts that makes it possible for us to talk the same, speak the same language. So for example, tokens is a concept that allows us to talk about the same thing, because designers also talk about tokens. So a token would typically be like Red 500 or something. And then you have variants, which I also understand is a concept that designers can really relate to. And that's the point. We want to have an API that reflects what the designer does. So yeah. So what I thought we could do now, I think we have some time, is to actually just go into the typing, because this has been kind of thing with this stream, is that we do all sorts of crazy stuff with typing. And we're going to type out this API. And then we are going to like implement it, and I'll release it under some tag so we can try it in our app. And then we're going to like leave it at that, and then this will be some spin-off outside of the stream so that we can continue on our app, because that was our original intention. Anyways, let's see. So let's look at this first. So we have this iStyled type, and what it currently does is take either you give it a default, like the default properties, but we're not having properties anymore. So what we can do here is to basically just remove this thing like that. And now we have, let's see, we have our iStyled. Yes. And that actually what we have here now is the callback, which takes the CSS argument, which we see up here, and then it returns a polymorphic component, which is not really true for this thing, but it is true for, let's see. Okay. Let's see. So we are going to define, sorry that I'm jumping a little bit here, but let's see what we're going to do. Okay, so we have this thing here, which basically just returns, this is actually supposed to return a string. Let's check this out. And then I guess we don't need this one. Okay, so we have our main styled function, which is type now, and that returns a string because it only returns like the styling. And then we also want to return this thing, which is basically just typing by looking into all the possible HTML elements. Intrinsic elements are like div, span, all of that, input, all of them. And then it says that what we are going to return from this, or sorry, not return, but what this is going to be is iStyle, but then we have like a callback here again, which I guess is correct. Oh yeah, no, we have to split this up into two. So let's call it iBaseStyle, which doesn't have this. And then we have iStyled, which doesn't have that thing, but has this thing. Let's see. It doesn't have this thing either. Oh, did I remove my polymorphic thing now? I never remember that. Do we still have it? Ah, let's see. There it is. Polymorphic. Let's see. Okay, so every single one of these elements are going to have the same, it's going to be a function you call, you get the same kind of argument here, and then this is going to return the polymorphic thingy. Let's see. This might seem a little bit crazy, because it really is. And I'll try to explain it. Let's see, are we doing this right? Oh, parentheses. Let's see. Is this right? It's that one. Oh, something wrong here. CSS extends. Oh, should that be there? No, that should be like this, I think. Ah, oh, I hate this. Okay, let's just copy this one. Let's see. What am I doing wrong here? Oh, oh, yes. Oh, sorry. This should be over here. And then this should be string. So the callback returns a string, and then the function we call returns a polymorphic component. Cool. But then we have our second argument here. Okay, so what we type now is this thing is what we call iBaseStyled. And then we have this thing is what we call iStyled. So in a base style, we only have a callback, which takes the CSS utility or the composer. And then we have this other thing, which is typed by going through all the intrinsic elements by key. And then each key is a function that takes a callback, which has a CSS composer. And then it returns a polymorphic component based on like the div. For example, if it's a div, you will get the attributes of a div. Cool. And then this one also has the possibility to do sorry, Fabrice, Y1? I'm a little bit unsure what you mean by Y1. Let's see. And then we have variants. And of course, you don't have to name those. Or you don't have to pass that argument, but you can. Yes, and how should we type this? So basically, we need to use a generic here. Yeah, how are we going to do? Oh, yeah. And this is the tricky thing. Like, I can't use a generic up here. The previous message, it says message retracted on my screen. Anyways, sorry. So I can't use a generic here because we're explicitly passing in the config. So we have to use a generic here. We actually have room for a generic here because we have a function here. So we can say v extends, so v for variance, and that extends an object where we have the prop key, which is the string, which is what we see up here. And then this will be an object of a variant name, for example. And then each of these has a function. Well, it's basically, yeah, maybe I can do this. I can say yeah, this is nice. I can say base styled. Yeah, I can do that. Okay, sorry, I just got a couple of comments and it was a bit of delay. It was like having a conference call. Yes, so what we did now is that we have typed out that our function here, like the thing that actually does, it's kind of tricky to see it, but maybe I can give an example here. So we have our style.div. So what we have typed here is that it's a function. That's what we're expressing here. So it's a function that takes a callback, which we're expressing here, which takes the CSS thingy, and this returns a string. So the CSS composition tool, it always returns a string like this. And then this whole thing returns a polymorphic component. Now what we want to do is that we want to populate this polymorphic component with some props. And these props are based on the keys we have in our variants. So if we first insert our variants here, like this, it means that when we call or insert the second argument of variance, it will be picked up by this generic. And then we can use that generic to extract what keys are we using, what values should we be able to give. Wow, this is, I don't really think about this when I write typing for APIs. But and it might seem, I don't know, I guess all of you have felt this thing where for the user or the consumer of the tool or the application or whatever has this really great experience. And it seems super, super simple. And you're sitting there and yeah, you should see the code for this. Like making things simple often requires a lot of complexity under the hood. It's not like the Apple mentality where the insides is as beautiful as the outside of the box or the device. But again, in hardware, maybe that's easier to do. I don't know if the code base at Apple is as beautiful as their hardware. Yeah. Anyways, let's finish this typing. So now we have our generic, which means that we want to give some additional props here. And the props we want to give is by going through each key in our variants here. So what's it like? Okay, let's call it, I hate this, that like there's a convention of using single letters for generics, which I really hate, because I just come up with, so for example, N or P maybe. In key of V. Okay, so P will become the prop key. So for P in key of V, which means that any variant we insert will become its own prop. And then for each prop, we want to say that the key of VP, so any key in the variant is a value for the variant, which means that if I were to blah, not blah, let's do something, container. If I were to say container, and we have a variant called, oh yeah, maybe I should give an example here. We have a variant just called variant. That means that that's a P, so that's picked up, which means I can write variant here. And then when I say key of VP, it means that any key inside variant should be a value, a possible value. So that means if I were to do primary here, secondary here, then that would actually become valid values here. Okay, so that's the deal. So let's see if this actually works. Let me save that. And we are going to now say that the styled instance here is going to be, yeah, we are just going to hack this. Let's see, it's going to be an ibase styled, where we pass in the config. Where do we have the config? Let's see. It's going to be that one, and it's going to be the iStyled. So we're just saying that our styled variable, or the thing that where the API starts, is going to be a combination of these two. And iStyled. Okay, cool. So let's see what happens now. Okay, so now we have like all these different things, and you see that we also have some typing for a function, because it is a function. So if I do CSS there, we have the things, color, red, cool. And then if I do, I might need to optimize a little bit here. I think this is okay. It's a little bit tricky to understand the cost of doing typing like this, as we saw with when we worked with state machines and the matches API. I just had like 2 additional method overrides, and suddenly it blew up like even Code Sandbox. And also running locally, my computer just completely went haywire. And that was just because of a couple of overrides. So it's really difficult to see the performance impact when you do typing. But I think this should be good, because we're not like running through things twice and stuff like that. So yeah, let's see now. So I did that works, and this should return a string. And it returns a string. And then we have yeah, sorry to bring this on you in the morning. But it's really fun for me to show you like the internals of doing typing in libraries when you want an API that's familiar to a JavaScript developer, which is not like class-based, but it's actually more of a functional and doing the stuff we typically do in JavaScript APIs for tools. Let's see. And then we have like header style.h1, and we should be able to say CSS color red, which should be perfectly okay. And this, it returns a polymorphic component. And then I should be able to do like this. And now I should say like variant. We can write this out. Variant, primary. Do I get my CSS? No, I didn't for some reason. Oh, I think maybe I know why. Oh yeah, it should rather be the callback. It shouldn't be the actual function. It should be the callback. Yeah, so we could move this callback into its own type, but I'm lazy. So let's do this instead. Let's see now. CSS. There we have it. Color. Whatever. Oh. Yes, now we have the variant. I'm not sure if I'm actually able to test this. I might need to change the... Let's rename to TSX just to see if I can test this. Yeah, I'm not sure if I actually properly get the styling here, because blip header, is it? Oh yeah, cool, it's working. Okay, yeah, so we have our variant here, and it even says primary. That's cool. That's cool. Primary. That's nice. So it's working. Okay, so this was a nice session. We actually got the typing to work, and it showed you really well how I build typing in libraries. I do this thing where I write out the typing first, and it's really awesome when I write it out and it works on the first try, but typically it doesn't, which we also saw here. I did something wrong. And yeah, so what I could also mention here is that we have this polymorphic component, and it's actually just a React component type. The only thing it adds is that it adds a prop called as, which means that if I were to have this as an A, for example, it would give me the typing for href. But if it was a button, for example, it does not have the typing for href. So it actually understands, based on the value you give here, what other attributes are actually available, which is super nice. Okay, but we got the typing working, and that's typically the hardest part. So the next, yeah, maybe we can just call it TSX. So the next part would be to actually implement this. And I thought about one thing, and that is, since we're using since we now know that all the styling is static, you only have these variants, and how should I explain this? Maybe we should rather talk about this next time. Yeah, I think that makes sense. What I wanted to talk about is how we optimize the evaluation, because we only want to evaluate the styling once. So when the component renders, the first time it will like look at the styling defined, it will inject the rules, but after that it shouldn't even touch it. It already knows about everything, so it doesn't need to evaluate a single thing. It just knows about the different class names it can insert, and it will just do that. Yes, I think. I'm not sure if that's even needed, because Stitches has a pretty cool way it handles evaluation. So when it does the first evaluation, it has this really good caching mechanism. So I'll have to check that to be sure, but we can talk more about that later. But that will be fun to try to implement this. And then we'll release it and we try it in our app. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll kind of close this chapter in our streaming so that we don't start becoming like a library implementation stream, but we actually get back to building our app. But I think it's kind of fun. Or give me some feedback if you feel like this is way too off-road. This wasn't what I signed up for. But yeah, I kind of just wing it as I go, and I kind of need your feedback to put me on the right track again. Or is there the ASProp is from the polymorphic box package? Yeah, I believe, yes, React polymorphic box. I have a text that prop would solve the problem with types. Right now it's always a div. Yeah, like this is like the reason I'm using React polymorphic box is because it's insanely difficult to do this kind of typing. Where so when you look at something like a div, the way you can mentally think about it is it's an actual object. So it has like a tag div, and then you have props. And this is generally really difficult to do, is to infer based on one prop what other props should be. Yeah, it's not like, it's trickier. Like it's not instantly apparent, at least in the beginning, how to properly do that. And especially when you kind of combine that with JSX, it becomes like even more blurry how to actually do this. So yeah, I'm just using that package because they sold it, and then I don't have to think about it. I just want that as prop. And you can use this for anything. You could even use this like, it's not like library specific. You can just use it in your app if you want to do that. But you actually have to like, it's only the or do they have, yeah, sorry, of course they have the component as well. So as you can see here, box. So we are creating a box here. Yes. Cool. That's it for now. We're way overdue, actually. I have to get to work. You probably do as well. And I'll see you tomorrow, and let's finish this implementation, and then we'll move on with the app. Cool. Bye-bye.